Dear colleagues, let us announce the next panel of the forum. Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to announce the next panel of the forum, Association Agreement in 2021. Where are we now? So we discussed at the previous panel the dreams and strategies. Now we should probably discuss the action plans. So where we are in the implementation of such association agreements, what sectors benefited the most, what sectors probably lacked in the progress, and how EU and our countries can enhance our cooperation. So let me introduce our panelists. Julian Groza, Executive Director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms, Republic of Moldova. Vano Chkhikvadze, EU Integration Program Manager at Open Society Foundation, Georgia. Oleksandra Bulana, Research Fellow of the Ukrainian Center for European Policy. Daniel Szeligowski, Head of the Eastern Europe Program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. And Nicolas Cendrowicz, Deputy Head of the Georgia and Moldova Unit at the European Commission. Welcome, dear speakers, dear members of the panelists. Sorry? Okay. I will start from one question to all panelists and would be thankful for your answer within 3-4 minutes. So the question is the following. Are we still moving forward with the implementation of association agreements? Is the dynamic is positive or we have some backwards? And if you could describe the speed of this implementation, are we moving fast in implementation or not so much? So let me start from that side, from Julian, and then we will finish with European Commission. So Julian, where we are with the implementation of association agreement in Moldova?
So 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Quite a challenge.
That will be a challenging panel.
For almost 1,000 pages of the association agreement together with the annexes, at least in the case of Moldova. But I'll try to be brief and give a bit of the context. And of course, we'll go into more details during the Q&A session. First of all, of course, I'd like to use this opportunity and once again refer to this publication that Leo and his team led to prepare it, where Vano and me have been contributing. I remember that I have been contributing to the first edition of this comparative analysis, which we thought was a good snapshot about the assessment of the state of affairs in terms of implementation of the association agreement. And I really was happy that we did it also this time, because it gives you really a good overview about the way where we are, especially for those who are really busy. Policymakers, think tankers, journalists are really lazy to go into long reading reports like we do, for example. We do shadow reporting already for 7 years on the association agreement implementation. We have our publication done every year. We are now working on the next edition of this shadow report, and we will be publishing it in November, on 10th of November. So briefly about where we are. I think one of the main conclusions we have identified in the process of monitoring how the implementation of the agreement is done in Moldova could be reduced to one, basically, statement. We have done much better as a country in implementing the association agreement there where we had more concrete kind of benchmarks, more concrete conditions, more concrete legislative framework for approximating with European Union legislation. And we did we have been less effective in terms of progress in areas that involved more general principles. And I will give you an example. After already 7 years of implementation of DCFTA with the European Union, I think Moldova is doing quite well in the sense of the transposition process, in the sense of judging on the impact of DCFTA on Moldova. It had a great impact in terms of our trade with the European Union. Our trade now is very much connected with the European Union market. Over 63% of the trade, of the exports are going to the European Union. Half of the imports are coming from the European Union. But also, it has also indirect impact on our budget, on the SMEs development, on the number of jobs, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, we're doing much better in terms of DCFTA implementation, which is part of the association agreement. Of course, here I have to do a note that we still have a lot of things to do in order to fully value the opportunity of DCFTA. And the main challenge is really about implementation of the transposed legislation, ensuring the functioning authorities responsible for ensuring that the standards of the European Union, which are now fully transposed in Moldovan legislation, are effectively implemented by the actors. Whenever looking at the SPS requirements, we have a lot of things to do there in order to fully value the opportunities of the CFTA. Because we have not progressed on that, we are not able to export still goods of animal origin, with exception of some, and so on and so forth. So this is, I think, a short snapshot on what is done, where we are progressing much better. And again, looking at the principles, provisions, the general statements in the agreement, which are basically looking at political aspects, justice and home affairs. There is the areas where we're doing less, or should I say, not to say worse totally, because I'm still trying to use diplomatic words, even though I'm not in government for many years already, but my diplomatic background is somehow pushing me to be less articulate on that. But definitely to say that, I think when looking at the association agreement implementation, justice sector was basically the real backslide, where actually produced a negative impact on the potential of fully valuing the opportunities of the association agreement with the European Union.
Yeah, we will talk about sectors a bit later, but the question is, so I understood the dynamic is positive, so the speed is fast, medium, or slow?
Well, dynamic is positive, and when looking at our general EU-Moldova relations, when looking at the benefits that the EU-Moldova relations have provided to the citizens, looking to the EU role and the values that the EU is promoting and Moldova committed to implement, there, of course, you see the benefits. I mean, European Union is the main development partner of the Republic of Moldova, supporting not only the implementation of the reform agenda, but also capacitating, empowering the institutions, and also providing assistance to other actors who can benefit from it, like SMEs, like citizens, like mass media, like local authorities. And this trend is in particular observed after European Union started to be more critical about the process, more outspoken about the process, and started also to apply the principle of strict conditionality. And whenever governments have not been delivering, the European Union was pointing to that very often and using the backsliding in the democratic processes in justice sector as clear conditions, and the government were not delivering. The EU was still continuing to support Moldovan citizens, reorienting the assistance, again, to other actors of change that could benefit from it, and also at the same time providing the opportunity of creating this internal pressure on the authorities to keep them more accountable in the process. So I think that is important to mention whenever we talk about the speed of the process. It's very difficult to say whether it's fast, slow, or medium, because again, there are other elements, objective elements, like, for example, the pandemic situation or political instability that affected the effectiveness and efficiency of the authorities to effectively implement the association agreement. And as I said, we have published our report last year, and we're doing the assessment of this year. Unfortunately, the year of 2021, especially for the first time, shows that not much has been done, because the government, the ministries, were very much overwhelmed of the pandemic, of the political instability, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. That's quite clear. Oleksandra, over to you. So how would you assess the implementation of association agreement in Ukraine?
First of all, I would say that it's a big pleasure for me to be here and to discuss European integration processes here. Since 2014, our organization monitors Ukrainians' progress in with implementation of EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, and we annually share our report concerning this topic. Overall, we believe that Ukraine is going its European integration way, and year by year and step by step. We have just recently presented our report for 2020 in the first half of this year. According to our research, we see that the progress with the implementation of association agreement is currently 49%. It's a comprehensive assessment. This is 7% more than it was a year ago. So we have a progress in European integration reforms. And for this moment, we assess that more than a quarter of all commitments under the agreement are fully implemented in Ukraine. I think it's a very good result because just a year ago, we have just 12% of commitments that was fully implemented. Still, we cannot say that the progress is very fast, at least as fast as we want to be. Good thing is that many sectors for this moment are at the status of implemented changes into the real life rather than more drafting laws, where our laws are fully implemented with EU legislation, and this laws actually works in practice. We call it perfect fulfillment of commitments, and there is a growth of this case, as I already told, from 12% to 26%. I would like to point that a number of reforms that started in 2019, they were brought to its logical conclusion only in this year. So we still need almost two years and sometimes more to move the reform from its start to its conclusion. And but we still have a long way ahead. Maybe a quarter of all the commitments are at the early stage of implementation. That means that legislation or some implementation steps still should be developed. And another quarter is still has not even begun.
Okay, thank you. So I understood positive dynamic and very fast implementation. Is correct?
No, it's not very fast. It's not so fast as we want it to be, but the dynamic is positive, and especially positive in as with
No, we will discuss sector a bit later. If you are talking about sectors, we will discuss.
No, I talk not about sector, but I want to say that when commitments with perfect fulfillment, they grow. So some of reforms which started before, maybe 2 years ago, they came to its logical conclusion, and that's good because we have a quarter of all the commitments are already done.
Great, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Vano, what's going on in Georgia in terms of implementation?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, and I just want to also extend my congratulations to the organizers of this forum, because it's not an easy task to do it live in these modern times. When it comes to the implementation of the association agreement, I have to say that the progress is pretty uneven We can see the sectors where we witness real good progress. I mean, from the legislative point of view, particularly, there are still several shortcomings when it comes to the proper implementation of those legislations which are amended or which are adopted. But we also have to bear in mind that Georgia actually has to start from this scratch, because years ago Georgia was pursuing this libertarian approach, and now we are trying to kind of build up on the new institutions, passing the legislations, etc., etc. Since you are going to ask us sector by sector later on, I would not elaborate more on that. There are the fields where we really see that there is tangible progress, but unfortunately there are the things where we don't see much progress, and there is a kind of wish that there was much more done in that particular dimension. Just to answer your question that I'm sure that you will pose me, whether it's a fast or medium or slow, I would say that the road is pretty bumpy, so you cannot really drive fast there. So I would say that this is medium, but the progress is definitely there. And I will elaborate more on during during our panel on that.
Great, thank you very much. So we are 3 countries. We are quite optimistic with the progress and with the level of implementation. Daniel, may I ask you the same question, but from the point of view of, let's say, the EU member state, of someone who is outside the association agreement countries?
Let me try at least a bit. So, dobrego dnia, dziękuję za zaproszenie. Hi everyone. These questions, are we still moving forward, and whether there is positive dynamic or not? So these are basically not yes, no questions. I mean, at least they appear at the very first sight that it is the case. So as you have seen, it is possible we can spend the entire session discussing the successes, but we can spend the entire session discussing the failures. So of course it depends at the end of the day on political will. So what you see is depends on where you sit, of course. And if you are a proponent, I mean, if you want to see progress, you clearly see progress. If you want to see failures, that's an easy thing, you see failures. I mean, if you are a proponent of closer cooperation between the European Union and the EAP countries, so then of course you point to the associated trio. You would say that there is lack of this grand political narrative. There is a need for closer cooperation with those countries that have the necessary political will. But still it's harder and harder to get the social support for reforms, which are painful, which are costly, etc. And of course, vice versa. If you are against closer ties between the European Union and free associated countries, then you can passionately elaborate on how important it is to get this all the regulations on vacuum cleaners, etc. nitty-gritty. So basically everything just to avoid politics. No secret now that many EU countries are against closer ties with the EAP. Just what I overheard, 2 examples of what I overheard recently from top diplomats from 2 big member states that I'm not going to mention this time, but you know probably who I have in my mind. So the first diplomat recently said when we discussed the future of the EAP that we can talk only about sectoral cooperation, but not about sectoral integration. That's too much. But yes, that's sectoral integration, that you get all these documents, declarations, etc., what we promised as European Union. And the second diplomat, that's a kind of funny thing, because he said something like that we, Poles and Ukrainians, you can have your discussions on Ukraine's European perspective and Ukraine joining the European Union, because this is kind of political fiction. But now, if you propose something very tangible, I mean, integrating with the EU market, no, that's too much. I mean, we cannot allow for that. So, of course, I'm saying this not without purpose, because paradoxically, everyone could be happy with the status quo. So, those who are the proponents of closer ties with the EAP countries, they see progress. Those who are against this closer ties, they are paradoxically contented as well, because they can always point at kind of corruption, problems with rule of law, etc. From their point of view, lack of progress is a positive dynamic as well, because it allows them to keep the EAP countries at bay. Now about the speed. it's hard to say if it's fast, medium, or slow. So I came here today in the morning from Odessa, and then one of my friends from Donbass, she told me the story about her father, who in the 90s used to travel to Odessa to the famous Yomi Kilometer market. He bought different things then and be back to Donbass. And when he drove back to Donbass, he was often followed by some shady guys in a car. So bandits just waiting for him to stop and get robbed. So I think that's the case with the EAP countries now. They embarked on a long trip with no end in sight. The driver is already a bit, I would say, bored, maybe, or he's falling asleep. The car is running out of fuel, but still they cannot drive back because there is this guy that cannot be named for, going behind them. So now the deal basically is because two sides need to deliver. So the one thing is, we as the West, we have to provide the EAP countries with sort of additional fuel, and the driver has to make sure that he does not fall asleep. And Russia is the one who is behind. So talking about speed, I think that you are driving fast enough to get there. Just don't fall asleep and make sure that we get some additional fuel.
Thank you very much. So I think that you answered the question. So let me then move to Nicholas. We have a representative of European Commission here who can provide the point of view of European Commission. Yes. What about the speed and the dynamic of implementation of associations agreements?
Well, thank you very much for that, Olena. And actually, can I give thanks also to our civil society colleagues for their assessment, which is important for us to see where we are. Of course, when we ask governments, they will tell us one thing, but it's helpful to have that kind of compared with an assessment from civil society. Now, what do we think about the association agreements? We feel, frankly, that these association agreements have been successful if you look at what they were supposed to do. So these association agreements create an association between the EU and these three countries. They are the most ambitious agreements that we have with any international partners outside those, the Western Balkans. These agreements cover some 70% of the acquis. I'm sure that our colleagues might qualify that number, but that's the best estimate that we have. And it provides a roadmap or perspective for the integration or access to the internal market. And we've talked a little bit about some of the successes in terms of the reorientation of trade between the countries and the EU. We have the visa liberalization, which is a very, very tangible example of that association. And these agreements have built-in mechanisms for review and updates. And that includes being able to cover the new fields as the EU evolves. We've already talked today about discussions on the European Green Deal, about the digital transformation. So, in terms of what these agreements were set out to do, we're very positive. I think we would give it 4.5 stars on TripAdvisor if we were asked to rate the nature of these deals, these agreements. In terms of the dynamic, I would really agree with what Julian said just now, which is that where there are areas where there are clear benchmarks or easy areas for transposition and implementation, yes, the countries have done very well, and your implementation reports have told that story. There are plenty of other areas inside the association agreements which are a little bit more complicated. I don't think we need to hide. We will have the discussion later on. These concern questions such as rule of law and governance. And this would lead me to provide an answer to your question about the speed of the reforms. Are we going fast, medium, or slow? And I don't know whether that's actually the easy or the right way to ask the question, because a lot of the easy things have already been done. And now we're dealing with some of the complicated areas, which we've seen in the EU, which we've seen in candidate countries to join the EU. These are areas which take an awful lot of time, and we usually seriously underestimate how long that will take. And several of you are embarking on difficult reforms, such as reforms for the justice sector. We prefer to say, don't do this fast, please do it right. Take the time that it takes. I understand that sometimes you're quite impatient to do that, but it's not as easy as that. This is not about speed. We're also asking countries to implement a whole area of the acquis, which, frankly, in the EU, we've taken years or decades to do. So I think we should maybe scale down how much we demand of the countries. Energy sector, with energy as a subject which has come up quite a lot today, but reforming, restructuring, unbundling in the energy sector, this takes an awful long time. And we'd prefer not to sort of say you need to do it by tomorrow. Sometimes that is what the message that we get, but it takes the time. So all this to say, I don't know if we're going fast or slow. What's important is the political commitment and the direction of travel, rather than, let's say, the speed that we're going at. And Daniel's fantastic metaphor about the driver in the car, I think, is a good one. Let's continue going forward in the right direction with the necessary political will, sometimes to tackle difficult areas of reform. And that's perhaps a bit more important than the speed at which we're going.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your fantastic answers. And I think I can assume that we have like 4.5, yes, 5 stars on TripAdvisor's for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia on implementation of association agreement. So my next question will be a bit more narrow on sectors. So could we please discuss what sectors benefited the most in our countries from the association agreement? And what actually Nicolas said, where are the most complicated tasks? What are the most hard to achieve? And again, maybe let's start from Julian, yes.
Thank you, Olena. As I already tried to hint in my introductory remarks, obviously everything which is connected to DCFTA implementation in the case of Moldova is something that provides this overall, how should I say, a more or less positive assessment whenever looking at the association agreement. And also, when looking at the complexity of the effort, the DCFTA component is also the biggest. It's about comprehensive. It's about the transformative power of the DCFTA title in the association agreement that has not only on Moldova's economy, on Moldova's sustainable development, but also on areas that are indirectly linked to that. And also, Nicolas mentioned about 70% of the acquis. Like a majority of this acquis is very much in this area. And then when looking at the sector cooperation aspects of the association agreement, which is the Title 4 in the case of Moldova, there's a lot of connection between the DCFTA and the sectors. Energy, for example, is one of them. For example, when looking at the energy sector, in Moldova case, the fact that Moldova was already somehow advanced in cooperation with the EU in the energy cooperation, being part of the Energy Community Treaty, that helped to basically prepare the ground for the commitments that Moldova took in the association agreement. And precisely because of that, when you're looking at the agreement, you'll find that there is a lot of references to commitments Moldova had in the Energy Community Treaty. And one of them is the third energy package, for example, which became in the mean the fourth energy package, and so on and so forth. So in this area, when looking at the approximation that Moldova does, for example, it looks fine. But at the same time, when looking again at the CFTA component, there are a lot of the acquis which is complicated, it's complex. And in order to produce impact, it has not only to be properly transposed in our legislation, but it has to be, more importantly, properly implemented. And looking at that, it's not only about the political will, it's not only about the capacities that the authorities, the competent authorities should have in order to make sure that the transposition implementation is done properly. But it's also about the ability of the state, of the government, to provide support to the actors which have to properly do the implementation. When look, again, one example is the standards. Moldova has approximated 100% of the EU standards. But when looking at the implementation, you'll see that not all the economic agents, not all the companies in Moldova are implementing the EU standards. Why? Because of the legacies and the connections that the country has with the Ghost region. And also because of the fact that it's, of course, for them as economic agents, having trade relations, I don't know, with countries that apply Ghost, it's much easier not to apply the EU standards, because applying EU standards, implementing EU standards means costs or investments that they need to make in order to make sure that, that these standards actually produce impact on their trade opportunities with the EU. So many economic agents, for example, just because of the lack of enough funds to transpose the standards, they choose the easy way and try to see ways of trading with countries that, for example, continue to apply Ghost, for example. And in that sense, one of the attention that has to be dedicated in this is, of course, to help the SMEs in particular. That in Moldovan case, it's about 95% of the business is actually represented by SMEs. And looking at the impact of the CFTA, then you would see that indeed a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises, mainly the agriculture, the farmers, are benefiting, because a lot of a good share of the trade with the European Union is actually fruits, vegetables, cereals, and so on and so forth. Another part, which is also important, and that is where we were standing much better, is it's industrial goods, I mean, spare parts, for example, because we have free economic zones that provide facilities for investment of other countries, other companies in Moldova, and provide these products, and they export it to the European Union, for example. Right? But, for example, when looking at cereals, I mean, we have been exporting a lot of this type of products, wheat and so on and so forth, to the European Union market. But those who are exporting, they are the larger companies, and they are buying from small producers, farmers, on some type of prices, and then they export on the other type of prices, higher prices, and the larger producers in this sense benefit more than the agriculture producer that sold, for example, that product. I don't know, right? So there are a lot of things of, it's about approximation, it's about transposition, it's about implementation. And one of the elements which was the most challenging and the main constraint in valuing the potential of the CFTA is, no surprise, corruption. Is justice, way how the justice works, because it has implications on the investment opportunities, it has implications on the business environment, and it has implications including on the implementation of SPS measures, for example. So it's very important that, for example, the Food Safety Agency is not corrupt, but it is doing its job properly, right? And so on and so forth. So in that sense, these elements, which are cross-cutting when looking at governance issues, corruption issues, justice aspects, which are provided in the association agreement in the separate titles, they're more general in terms of principles. I mean, it's normal because it's quite difficult. It was quite difficult at that moment to provide very concrete benchmarks for that, right? And here I would like to conclude with again the element, the statement I made at the beginning, and the lesson that we learned also in these 7 years, where we have clear benchmarks, where we have clear conditions, where we have clear things that country has to do, we are delivering much better. And I'm really happy that after some years of effort, of advocacy effort from the think tank community, from civil society, from member states, in the EU and in Moldova, finally, European Commission works with Council of Europe on the justice dashboard for the Eastern Partnership countries, which was a good example of how in the European Union, the scorecards, it's the main indicator of assessing the rule of law situation, and now it became a condition for providing assistance. It worked in the Western Balkans. Now it's this experience, positive experience, transposed to Eastern Partnership countries, and now we know that Commission, the Council of Europe experts are working on these dashboards, and I hope that this effort, together with inputs from the civil society, national governments, Commission and experts, would help us to provide these benchmarks. And for us, those who are out of government, it will be much easier also to monitor the progress and also keep accountable the government to deliver. And also at the same time, for the government, it will be much easier to report, and also for the EU, it will be much easier to know what to demand and how to structure also these elements of benchmark. The final answer, the final remark I want to make in this regard, I think things started to move much faster, if you want to talk about in dynamics, whenever we started to see the application of the conditionality principle by the European Union. Whenever we had the strict conditionalities provided for the assistance for our countries, we have seen that this instrument was putting additional pressure and raising more accountability on the government, but at the same time clarifying for those who are outside the government what to demand and how to push the government. So in that sense, I think that is another element that I can mention in terms of positives that helps us to better identify the conditions, the benchmarks that we can work a bit more in order to see how we can use the instruments like association agenda, like national implementation action plans, the regular dialogue that the EU and Moldova has in subcommittees and committees, in the Association Council, really to together try to push the process. And final element that I want to mention, sorry, from the personal experience we had for years, there we had multi-stakeholder implication in the process, where we had at one table, now in one Zoom room, governments, Commission, civil society organizations. We have seen that it works much better. It provides for all of us a clear understanding what we have to do, and for all of us also creates the opportunity of working together, but at the same time putting more pressure on those, or creating more accountability on those who have to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julian. Oleksandra, the sectors which are successful and not so much in Ukraine. Just before I will give you a floor, I would like to say that today our parliament has adopted a law on energy efficiency, which is part of the association agreement, and which was waiting in the parliament for, I think, 6 years. So a bit of good sign for yeah, some good signs from Ukraine, but yeah, Oleksandra will tell us more.
As I told before, we conducted our studies for many years, and the success sectors, they remain the same, almost the same during this time. The most successful sectors we have in association agreement reforms are technical barriers to trade, energy sectors, and public procurements, and security policy. And this year we mentioned that we have new success, just one new successful sector. It's electronic communication, because a year ago the new law was adopted, and reforms in this sector are going pretty fast. Also, we have underperforming sectors where implementation of commitments are not on a very high stage. It's the sectors like agriculture, customs and trade facilitation, education, public health, transport sector, media sector. But even in this underperformed sector, we have some success stories, very good and very interesting. One of them is from customs sector. Customs commitments of Ukraine include joining the European system of transit. And 2 years ago, we have a very poor progress with this commitment. And at the end of 2019, the new law was adopted that started the reform. And since that time, a lot of bylaws was adopted, and a lot of regulations for this commitment. And this March started practical deployment of joint of common transit system at this time just on the national level of Ukraine. And I think it's a very successful case, and perhaps in the beginning of the next year we could expect to receive an invitation from the European Union to join the NCTS or to join the Common Transit Convention. The other good case is from public sector, from public health sector. It's in this sector a breakthrough was in transplantology. A year ago started the work with the Ukrainian Transplant Coordination Center. This is to coordinate and supervise local healthcare facilities engaged in transplantation. And we see that in 2019 we have just 78 surgeries in transplantology surgeries, but in the first half of this year it's already 126. So. And it's very important because this reform, it's really about saving people's life. So what I want to stress concerning these cases, in both of these stories were led by prominent and exhausting civil servants and from the relevant services and ministries. And we need bright and committed civil servants. But, so that is why the civil servants reform is so important. But unfortunately, we see the rollback in this sector for this moment. For 2 last years, it was not a very good situation in this sector. And we still have a lot to do. There are different commitments in association agreement. Some of them are just very complicated, like implementation of European customs legislation, for example, or reform in public health sector. Other commitments are just very unpopular in Ukrainian society, like creation a new labor code. And in other sectors, we see that sectors that are very successful in legislation implementation, like energy sector, they have obstacles in practical implementation. It's still very difficult for Ukraine to move to market pricing in this sector, and perhaps if we have a few sustainable growth years, we would remove these obstacles, but now it's still very difficult. And at the end, I would say that it would be much easier.
1 minute more, okay? Because so many questions.
Just want to mention the one thing, just the one thesis, that it would be certainly easier to implement European integration reforms in Ukraine if we had a clear view of European prospects after the full implementation of association agreement, it would be a very good stimulus.
Yeah, I'm going to ask this question to European Commission a bit later. But yes, thank you for raising this. So, Vano, on issues on sectoral...
Sure,
yeah,
yes.
thanks.
Yes, let me divide this into two parts. The first part would be those like fields where we have certain progress and measurable, I would say, and the one there where we are really lagging behind. As it was already mentioned, we have pretty much the similar situation in Georgia. Looking at the sectoral part, there are like at least 10 fields where we can say that certain progress was achieved. First and foremost, it's labor rights and labor safety, because the legislation was basically absent in Georgia when it was about the labor safety, and it led a lot of cases of the deaths and injury at the labor place. So we had something like several hundred cases of deaths and injury at the labor place, and there is a certain progress in that regard when it comes to the adoption of the legislation, and at the same time creating the institutions like labor inspectorate, which was abolished back years ago. Second field where we also see certain progress is it's a transport, because again there was basically no legislation when it was coming to the technical inspection of the vehicles in Georgia. You could have opportunity to drive any kind of car what you had without any kind of inspection. So now we are progressing in that. I don't mean here that everything is shiny and great there, but at least we have a progress in that field. Again, there is a certain progress when it comes to the technical barriers of trade, TBT. And we should also include here the food safety regulations. I know that the Parliament is struggling now for several years on the consumer protection law, and hopefully that it would reach to the final end, and that would be also very crucial and important. There was also some certain progress when it comes to the amendments in the election code in the country, and also on environmental legislation. What is also crucial is that Georgia managed to keep this progress on the fight against petty corruption. So basically, we are progressing, or we are keeping the place, and it's also indicated in the corruption perception index. Now let's move to the fields where we don't see much progress, or where it's certain regress even, I would say. First and foremost, this is of course the justice reform. And this is not something which I'm just saying here from my point of view. These are the reports and assessments which are done by the European Commission, by the US State Department, and unfortunately there is little progress, or there is none at all there. That was one of the kind of the causes why the Georgian authorities decided not to take this 75 million euro, because that part, the justice part, was not fulfilled. The second is, again, the fight against elite corruption, or high-level corruption, which is very much progressing in the country, and the watchdogs are very outspoken in that regard. But unfortunately, there is no, and that's a request of the civil society for years already, to establish the independent institution which is supposed to fight against the high-level corruption. But unfortunately, this request or this recommendation falls on the deaf ear. There is again little progress when it comes to the court systems, and I have to mention here that the trust to the courts in the country is extremely low. It's something like 20% of the society trusts to the court system. But the biggest challenge is not like the progress on these fields, but the biggest challenge are where are we standing when it comes to the kind of disseminating those benefits which comes from the EU integration. And unfortunately, there are not much in that regard. What I mean here is that if you look at the Georgia's GDP per capita, PPP, you can find out that basically there is no much progress there. We have something like 4,200 USD. This is 2 times less than compared to the poorest EU country, Bulgaria. When we look at the unemployment rate, this is 22%, which is pretty high. Or when we look at the subsistence allowances which are provided to the households, it's 13%. So I think that that's not only about implementation or non-implementation. That's also whether these benefits, which are affiliated with the EU integration, reaches out to the ordinary people and society. What I think that the best was in that regard is, again, the matter of mobility, which was mentioned here by Nicholas. Visa liberalization was, or this visa liberalization process as such, was very good indicator and very good, how to say, the motivator of the Georgian authorities to push for the reforms. The mobility is something where we do see that there are the benefits, like up to 1 million Georgian citizens had an opportunity to travel to the Schengen zone after Georgia got the visa-free travel, as well as the EU programs like the academic programs where, like Erasmus, where up to more than 5,000 Georgian students had an opportunity to study abroad. So what I want to kind of, conclude here, and I have to stress that the Georgian society, or the civil society actually, is very much supporting to the idea that was mentioned here several times by my colleagues from Georgia, submitting application for EU membership by 2024. Submitting application for us does not mean that we will become the member immediately. That's a very long journey, and we know that it's not an easy task to do. But the thing is that we have something like around 3 years, and a lot depends whether we can manage to progress on those shortcomings that I mentioned, because these are the political part of the Copenhagen criteria, and if we don't progress on that, I don't think that we can progress on our application. Submitting application literally is not a big thing, it's a like half-page document. You can submit it anytime. You don't need to wait for 2024. But the matter is that at that time of submission, how well you are on that fields and what is your track record. So I will end up here and would be happy to answer the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vano. So I think we can find some similarities or some sectors where all three countries have some, let's not say problems, but issues or challenges. Maybe I then will ask Daniel to provide a sort of helicopter view and try also to answer this question. So what, also from your perspective, what actually is going on and how would you assess this cooperation between the EU and these three countries in terms of implementation of association agreement? What would you name as success and challenges?
I will be presenting very much Polish point of view because Poland is actually the country that, apart from Germany, benefited the most from this FTA and as such from the EAP program itself. I'm starting from the top and then going down to the bottom. I've never been a proponent of a single EAP framework, so this one-size-fits-all approach for 6 EAP countries. I understood why it was the case, given different political reasons, but I guess that after what happened last year in Belarus, this reason is no longer valid. Still, unfortunately, I'm saying again, unfortunately, I don't see a window of opportunity to get kind of revolution in terms of reforming the EAP politically. One thing, then second thing, economically, building on what Nicholas said, I have often the impression that we want to have all irons in the fire all the time. I agree that probably these association agreements are too ambitious, and the point is that given the economic challenges created by COVID-19, the shortage of funds, etc., we have to prioritize more. So choose different sectors that we would really have a progress, not kind of small progress in each and every area that is covered by the association agreement. Now, a bit down to these different sectors. I'm an economist by profession, so I will mention trade, but again, given that Poland benefited mostly from the trade with the EAP countries, I mentioned trade and economy as a sector that is that I see as a success. More and more goods from these countries, they are coming to the EU market in Warsaw, in different Polish cities. You can basically find in each and every store some goods from Ukraine. Not only, this Russian sweets. Yet there are some obstacles, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, etc. There is political pressure not to open the EU market, not only in the Western Europe, but also in Poland in terms of agriculture, and there may be some tensions, probably, as I see it, if there are negotiations on renewing the association agreement with, for example, Ukraine. There will be pressure from the agriculture sector in Poland not to do that. The second example is that's been mentioned already, of course, people-to-people contacts with visa-free regime as a success actually in itself. We got tens of thousands of students from the EAP countries in Poland. Ukraine is obviously the biggest group. We got millions of workers from the EAP countries in Poland. That's an important thing to mention, not only in terms of, what they do in Poland is that they build the Polish economy, but actually they transfer a lot of money from Poland to their countries. And what is worth mentioning that the amount of money that the Ukrainian migrants transfer to Ukraine, kind of remittances, they are worth much more than the total FDI inflow to Ukraine. So that matters a lot, especially in terms of these COVID consequences. But people-to-people contacts are also important given the other reason. I mean, if you look at the opinion polls in Poland, then you can see that those who met Ukrainians, those who have them as friends, they have much more positive attitude. So if people talk to each other, if they meet each other, actually the attitude changes. The third sector, which I regard as success, is energy transition, increasing energy efficiency, etc. Cooperation between Poland and EAP countries in terms of energy in Poland is regarded as a success. Of course, there is this kind of question. I mean, what sort of energy transition we would like to see in the future? Who is going to cover all the costs of the energy transformation, etc. But these are questions that I don't have, probably not only me, but we will have to answer that in future. On top of that, obviously, comes different sectoral issues like cooperation in terms of culture, research, etc. So these are small things, but they are still worth mentioning. They matter a lot. Now on a negative note a bit, what is lacking, I think, is cooperation, or what lags behind is cooperation in security sphere, especially in terms of hard security. Although here, of course, I'm not sure if the EU is a proper actor, to deliver on that. Rather, I would point to NATO, yeah? But given that there are different disagreements, differences within the EU countries themselves in terms of foreign policy and security, but I see a room for improvement here. The second sector is everything connected to creating a favorable investment climate in EAP countries. That's not only about corruption, but it's about investment protection, property rights, shareholders' rights, judiciary reform, many different things. The fourth point, on a negative note, I guess it's kind of lack of willingness on behalf of the European Union or some member states of the European Union to engage more politically these three associated countries in terms of foreign policy, especially on different levels. It doesn't have to be, on the level of presidents, heads of governments, etc. Of course, different reasons, not to irritate Russia, not to send wrong signal that this would mean something in terms of joining the European Union quickly. But I think here as well there is potential to do much more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nicholas, I would probably have the same question to you, but I think the answer will be quite simple. So we can understand where the challenges are for all three countries. So may I make my question more complicated and will ask you, okay, you will say your point of view on the sectors, but anyway, if all three countries work so hard to implement association agreement, maybe they deserve a bit more in terms of not only cooperation, but integration, which we actually already discussed today. So what could be the next steps and what we should all expect from the European Commission in terms of integration, not only cooperation?
Well, Olena, I thought this question was coming. And it's something which we've been talking about a lot today. I mean, I'll start by saying what a great question, because you asked it in terms of integration, separating it from a discussion which we're having inevitably, which is about will the EU provide these countries with an accession perspective? And I mean, I don't want to be the bad person here. I think everybody in this room would like the EU to say yes. Please, here is your accession perspective. But I think we have to be realistic and say that's probably not going to be happening in the next few years. Let's see in 2024, when Georgia submits its application for membership, where things have changed. But right now, and this is not the opinion of Nick Cendrowicz, it's the opinion of people far more important than me in the decision-making process, including several member states Daniel mentioned, without mentioning them by name. This is probably not going to be welcome if it came tomorrow. As I said, let's see what happens a few years down the line. We might want to blame the Western Balkan countries for that, because they seem to be taking a very long time showing that they are actually ready for membership, and there's a certain amount of lessons learned there. That said, I think we can do an awful lot of things, and Mr. Popov this morning, I think he mentioned this in a very elegant way, which is let's put aside the purely political question about when can we join the EU or when can we apply for membership, and frame it more from the point of view of how can each of these countries show that they deserve to have that membership presented to them or offered to them, in terms of carrying out the necessary reforms, implementing fully the association agreement, tackling all of the reforms, and plenty of them have been talked about by the colleagues on this panel. These very difficult areas, I would say particularly on questions of rule of law, governance, fundamental rights, which is something which the EU is very sensitive about. If you can tackle that and implement 100% the association agreements, then your countries, let's say, are in a much better place to ask the EU, guys, association agreement completed, please give us a new challenge. But until that, it's going to be very, very difficult, and I would say also the context internally in the EU is quite complicated. That said, we can look at areas of integration. I mean, are we talking about integration or cooperation with the internal market? This might be a question of semantics, which is important for some people, but it might not actually be in practice. I think people's views are evolving. Can we talk about a deeper dialogue in certain areas? There is already a deep dialogue on questions of the DCFTA. Can we extend it to other areas? And I think that the EU is certainly quite open, for instance, to associating your countries to the discussion about the European Green Deal, for instance. I think we're open to the discussions, and these are more, let's say, bilateral discussions on broader questions of security, not hard security, because as you rightly pointed out, Daniel, we don't have any competence in that matter. But security is a very broad topic now, covering hybrid threats, cybersecurity, energy security. These are all very topical questions, and I think that the EU feels a very strong solidarity with each of your countries to try to go down that path. One thing that we are seeing since we're emerging from the pandemic, which is a difficult time for all of us, is we have a new framework for cooperation. And that framework for cooperation is not only the money, of which we could talk about it, but I don't think that that's necessarily the most important thing. It's more, how can we use this money to help leverage reforms and develop real progress for the citizens, which Vano was talking about, in terms of attracting investment, improving connectivity, helping the green and digital transition, and doing that in a way which is compatible with the EU, because for us, the European Green Deal is also our growth strategy, and we would very much like our partners and like-minded countries to be involved in that. So it's the month after next, we will have our Eastern Partnership Summit. Let's see what comes out of that when the member states say, these are the things which we're prepared to do. I'm just spitballing some ideas about where we could go, and with some of the countries we already have those dialogues. But I think it's pretty inevitable. I don't want to sort of give any kind of spoiler alert because I'm not in the room when this is being discussed. But the EU will be looking at how to deepen the cooperation and deepen the dialogue, deepen the integration even of the countries into some specific areas which I think are of interest to everyone.
Thank you very much. I have a bunch of questions, including some tricky questions, but we have like 10 minutes left, and I would like to open the floor to the question from the audience. So could you please help me with the microphones? Yes, Michael, and I see also him there. Yes. Let's take like 3 questions, and then we'll ask colleagues to answer.
I have a question for Daniel. I'm referring to your remarks about this business too ambitious, prioritize more. So my question to you is, what would you deprioritize? Given that the internal market is objective, being long-term objective, and that is a holistic thing. Or are you thinking, for example, just to be a little bit provocative, deprioritize the rule of law, for example? No. So what would you be deprioritizing?
Thank you very much. So another question over there. And if you have, I think the question there.
Okay. Well, of course, thank you to all panelists, really, really, without any nice words, artificial nice words, really interesting. Although we did not get from Nicholas optimistic scenario when it comes to accession perspective, but frankly, I was still heartened and pleased to listen to what was said, indeed. And we heard the words and the position of Brussels, I suppose, to encourage reforms further in all our respective countries. But my question to Nicholas first is, even in that context, when we should not expect, realistically speaking, accession perspective coming in some years to come, do you see this trio, associated trio, what has been really and what is really a highlight and a title of our gathering as an entity? What's the Brussels view toward the association trio? And if you see trio as an entity, as an one body organism locomotive for reforms, then how you further are going to support the internal cohesion and coordination and dynamism among those 3 countries? And with your permission, I have a question also to Julian. You talked about the EU's role also in terms of bringing or helping changes in Moldova. Can you briefly elaborate? You said at one point, if I recall it correctly, that when something wrong was happening, paraphrasing what you said, something wrong was happening in Moldova, then EU was sort of trying to increase the pressure upon the government. So briefly, if you can tell us how and how far you played its role in bringing changes in Moldova. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you. We can take one more question if there is from the audience. Yeah, there is one more. Sorry.
I have two questions. One is for the representative of the European Commission. How to make sure that the reports on implementation of the association agreements are as comprehensible as possible, because the last report on Moldova doesn't include all the details. The last date mentioned in the report is 7th of October, and I found in several paragraphs I found information that was not included, but is very important with regard to the rule of law reforms in Moldova, and not only that. So this is a question for the European Commission, and the other question is for about Georgia. How Georgia could actually really progress in terms of European integration when we have such a big influence of oligarchic interest in not only in the political sphere and the judiciary reform, but also in very practical commercial issues related to, for instance, Anaclia investment project. Because I'm not sure that the European Union would like to have in the EU a country which is so much embroiled in vested interests that are going so deep into various spheres of development of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So no questions. Let's now move to the answers. I would be really thankful for very short answers, because we have some events, I think, after this. Yes, some reception. And so let's start from Nicholas, because you have too many questions. So.
Well, I only counted two of them. On the trio, I mean, for us, the Eastern Partnership is not only a relationship between the EU and the countries, but also between the countries. And we always say, listen, there should be a framework where countries between them should develop their relations. And if three countries with a very strong and similar framework want to work together, for us that's fantastic. And I would say these trios should come to the EU saying, guys, we would like to have a discussion with you on X, Y, and Z, as you're already doing, or the associated countries are already doing with the DCFTA. And I was in the coffee break having a discussion with Michael Emerson, and he was saying the Commission has a little bit of a problem with the actual word trio. But we're getting there, because we would have a little bit of reticence with the idea of institutionalizing the idea of a trio as a subset of countries within the Eastern Partnership. And I don't know whether that's actually the most important question. The most important question is that three countries are talking together, preparing their positions together, for instance, going into the Eastern Partnership Summit, and have some great ideas about how to develop their cooperation with the EU. And I think that the EU would be very receptive to look how we could do that. On the question about the association implementation report being as comprehensible as possible, I mean, you said the latest information was from the 7th of October. Come on, that was 2 weeks ago. That's not a bad thing. But joking aside, I do admit that sometimes the documents that we write are difficult to read. We need to work on that. Me personally have always recommended that we're a lot clearer in our language and not hide it behind diplomatic niceties. The reports are written in English, and English is the language of what you don't say rather than what you do say, and sometimes that's a message which doesn't pass. So I completely take your point, and I think we need to be a little bit better and clear about this, particularly when it comes, and you mentioned clear messages about rule of law. This is at the heart of awful lot of what we do, and we could perhaps benefit from being clearer. I would add that these are reports which are drafted by committee, and that's not the best way to get a clear document, even if the message should be as clear as possible.
I'm sorry, but I didn't mean that the text is not clear enough. I was meaning that some facts are not included, which happened before 7th of October and are very important. Therefore, I think that sometimes probably we need to romanticize less. I think that there is an attempt and a tendency to subjectify, to have subjective opinions about the political developments in the country. And this could be to the detriment of the objectivity of the reports that are published by the EU institution. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Daniel, over to you on the question from Michael Emerson.
The latest Ukrainian economy strategy has 20 priorities, which means that there are no priorities at all. Because they can't come up with a few sectors, they can't decide what to do. This is why President Zelensky came to Washington with completely another new document saying about this rebuilding Ukrainian economy. So I would prioritize more and focus on socio-economic development at the moment, which means that we do not end up at some point again with the government which have the governments, I mean, I'm talking about free AA countries, the governments that are ready to deliver on reforms, but they are voted out because people didn't feel the change. So yes, I would focus on socio-economic development, and in this respect also, the European Union is changing. There is a discussion ongoing about the future of the EU, and it's not a done deal, although some countries would like to say that it is a done deal. It's not. At that point, the discussion is still ongoing. It's like Jacek Szeligowski says that integration with the European Union is like shooting to the ducks. So you don't aim at duck, but you aim at some point in future. I mean, you have to anticipate when the duck will be in a couple of seconds. So in terms of the free EA countries, they have to be engaged with the discussion on the future of the EU, and in this respect, adjust their priorities. You can always say yes, as Michael said, that which means deprioritizing. Yes, okay. Let's just adjust the financial questions and focus really on a few key sectors like energy, infrastructure, digital. Yeah, so that's a couple of things that would matter in future, and this DAC will be a few seconds away. We can, for example, focus or have a discussion in this region whether we can actually increase our, let's say, how to engage in the different chain values if there is a relocation of production from China or from Asia. That's the kind of future thing that we can focus on. But this kind of priorities, I mean, not focusing on big issues that generate costs, but I'm not quite sure if they at all would deliver gains to the society. So in this respect, I would prioritize more.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Vano, over to you. I think there was a question also to you.
Yeah. There was a question about this oligarchic issues, of course, and nobody denies that. And unfortunately, we are very close, or we already see the clear signs of the state capture. When it comes to the remedy, from my point of view, the remedy are in the hands of the society. So, and in the hands of the international partners. When it comes to the society, I think that they have to be bold in that regard to make a kind of, during the elections period, to be very bold and to be very decisive in that regard. And we see that gradually, very slowly, but steadily, the people are kind of fed up with this oligarchic ruling. But at the same time, I have to say that partially the remedy is in the hands of the international partners. And what I mean here is that I just mentioned about the independence of judiciary, and I have to say that USAID and EU spent millions, 60 million euro was spent on training of the judges who don't care about the trainings or on enhancing their skills. They just care about who is their patron and who they are supposed to serve. I mean, they used to serve Saakashvili, now they are serving Ivanishvili, so it's not a matter of the training. I think that in that regard, European Union or US, our partners have to be very clear. First and foremost, being a front runner, it's not actually the praise, it's a curse, and every time we saw it. Second, we have to have a very, very measurable indicators. like depolitization of the justice system. It's ridiculous, you know. Nobody really understands what that means. And every time when we are producing the shadow reports, the government says that we already did this, you know, and you cannot really prove that. And clear benchmarks. And the last but not least, it's about applying the alarms, you know. EU or US does like using or applying this alarm or uses this alarm when it's too late, unfortunately. So I think that these are kind of, you know, combinations which might be helpful to stop this oligarchic ruling, you know, not only in Georgia, but in each and every partner countries.
Thank you very much. And we have also a question to Julian.
Thank you very much. But I think the easy answer to your question is that, I mean, Moldova and the EU are partners in a contract, right? I mean, we have a lot of commitments. European Union also have its commitments. We also share values. And in that sense, EU, when Moldova was not delivering on its commitments in this contract, then what you started to do more effectively is just to point out that Moldova is not committing, is not delivering. That's very simple. And we started with statements, with declarations. We had also times when issues were happening internally in the country, but for the sake of stability, EU was not really outspoken. It also was in the times of success story of Moldova that I was part of. And when you realize that you're not enough outspoken about the process, in order not to, I don't know, to undermine the stability or so on and so forth, then we were in a situation to realize that that was not the proper approach. I mean, by intention or just by instincts. And this is when you move to being more outspoken with statements, with conclusions, being more precise in terms of things that are not working, getting commitments from the government to deliver on those benchmarks, on those conditionalities. And whenever things were not delivered, then sorry, you have not delivered again on your commitment. And so on and so. So I would put it in a very simple way. I mean, if one party is not delivering, then the other one has full right to demand to deliver to its commitments. And in that sense, I mentioned the conditionality because that was the crucial aspect. Since 2015, then 17. In one example, EU has provided a lot of support for justice sector, direct budget support. We also had assessments of percentages, how much of the strategy of the justice sector has been implemented, like 20%, 30%, 50%. Someone was saying 80% government, or experts monitoring would say 20%. But at the end of the day, justice is selective, is politicized, is not delivering. And that was a clear indication that the support that the EU was providing to support to the justice sector was in vain. So the EU decided to suspend the direct budget support because it was not implemented properly by the country. The EU resumed assistance to Moldova whenever some progress was done in the investigation of bank fraud, on some concrete legislation, in terms of anti-corruption effort, and so on and so forth. There was this roadmap instrument used, like national roadmap to implement priority action reforms, following from conclusions of the council. It was adopted by the government. It was really focusing on that, delivered. When the benchmarks were implemented, EU has resumed assistance. But the next day, after the delegation left from Moldova, the governing party at that time started to come up with additional initiatives, like, for example, legalizing assets of public functionaries, and which was actually undermining the whole effort in terms of anti-corruption and integrity. And then you again suspended assistance and so on and so forth. And then we had to struggle with economic crisis. Government asked for assistance, macro-financial assistance. EU, in a difficult environment in Moldova in terms of democratic functioning, with all the nitty-gritties linked to the mixed system which was promoted at that time. With all that, the EU said, no, we will provide you the support because the people of Moldova needs that support. And you provided it, but you get conditions. Started to be implemented, get the first tranche, for example, or even didn't get the first tranche, and we had elections in the mayoral elections in 2018, which were crucial. I mean, clearly, I mean, there was a decision just to, by court, to cancel the results of the local elections of the mayor in Chisinau. In the very same meeting, in the very same time that the prime minister was meeting with high-level officials with the EU, for example. Well, it was basically an obstruction of the whole principle of you say something and then something happens at the end, which actually undermines your commitment. The EU suspended the assistance. And then the EU said, okay, we will still continue to provide our support to the citizens of Moldova, in the benefit of the citizens of Moldova. And if government cannot manage those funds and cannot deliver on the commitments, we will provide it directly to the actors, to civil society, to mass media, to SMEs, to local authorities, to implement infrastructure projects, to provide benefits that citizens can see for their life. Because it's not only about legislation that has to be implemented, it's also about the benefits that the citizens want to see. And that was a crucial decision for the EU to reorient assistance and provide it from the government directly to local authorities, to civil society, to mass media, actors who actually were willing to perform on the reforms. At the same time, them being empowered to push more or to increase more accountability from the government. And then you had the sandwiched approach, basically. You had the empowered pressure from the inside, from the society, on the actors, on the stakeholders, on the government, and then the pressure coming from our developed partners, not only EU, IMF, US, all of those who have supported Moldova in this process. So that is a very simple approach, and then we have seen that this principle has been transposed or multiplied in the Eastern Partnership region, in the European Union as well, with the rule of law conditionality on the budget provided for member states. So in that sense, we have been one of the front runners or test case for how transformative power of the EU works outside and internally. And I think that is about pressure. Of course, politicians, especially those who were in government, they were saying that the EU is siding with opposition, or civil society is siding with opposition. EU is politicizing the process. And of course, at that time, the governments decided from being pro-European to be pro-Moldova, which was a trend there at that time. I mean, America first and Moldova first. Not because they were thinking about Moldova, but because they were not delivering on their agenda
If I
that
may
people
ask you
wanted
for 1
to deliver.
minute.
So I'd like to conclude here, sorry. Because I can tell you more of that story, but I think I answered your question. Thank you.
I'm sorry, please, but I'm really thinking that we already took too much time, and we have to continue our cooperation and discussion over the reception. So, but I would really say thank you to all the audience who is here, and also would like to ask you to applause to our great panelists who worked quite hard answering all your questions. Thank you, dear colleagues. You were great, and thank you for answering all those questions. And let's continue our discussions over the buffet.